right, good morning, everybody. We have 2 class periods left. Come on, a little bit more than, there we go, a little razor roof here, come on. This is exciting stuff, people. Let's see, so we're going to finish today. We have Tuesday, and then we have final exam coming up. That's all you guys have left. The assignments that you guys turned in, the 3rd assignments, should be graded. Most of them are graded. The rest, Jonathan said he should have them done in the next couple days. So if you don't have a grade yet, it should be coming. The exam, I just got the scores back. I have not posted them yet because there's a few people taking them today. I briefly went through, and it looks like there was probably, I think, 3 or 4 questions that people tanked on that again, I throw these out, so probably add 3 or 4 points back. And if I do that, I think the average is in the low 50s. So just to get 50 points out of 60, not percentile. Everyone just went, okay, not to freak you out. So overall, I think they looked okay. But we will talk about those on Tuesday, and I'll go through what the average looked like. And we'll talk about, on Tuesday, we're also going to talk about the final exam. What's going to be on there and what to expect and time and all that type of stuff. So, any questions? No? All right. So before we get started today, let's see what's in the news. So there's a crisis at Chipotle. All right? Have you guys heard about this? Apparently, everybody eats at Chipotle gets like explosive diarrhea. It's a nice image for 8 o'clock in the morning. Apparently, I haven't been following this too much, but they closed 43 restaurants in Washington State and Oregon, and there's been more. There's just a recent thing in Boston College where 80 students got sick from foodborne illness. And this is we talked about this some time ago, but this is a huge deal. This happened to Taco Bell a decade ago, and their sales plummeted for a year or 2 until people forgot about this. So if you have stock in Chipotle, I might want to pull it out really fast. But it just shows you how important this whole food safety thing is, because for a business, this can be a make or break type of thing. Let's see, what else? We're not talking about the sloth, although he does look kind of cool. It's Costa Rican animals for overworked Americans. I have no idea what that's about, but it seems interesting. Maybe I should click on that. So we talked a few weeks ago about this whole gene editing thing, right? Where we have the technology now, which we can go in and manipulate your DNA, which is exciting and scary at the same time. And actually, there was a paper just published about a group in China that have actually done this in embryos. So this means germline, which means you can influence your offspring. You can influence their genes. You can make them taller, run faster, think smarter, etc. It's one thing to be doing this for yourself if you have a disease like cystic fibrosis, where there's a mutation in a gene, and you can go in and tweak it and make it better and cure the disease, okay? But what if you can start manipulating your offspring? This brings in this whole new ethical realm, and this has been all over the news the last few days, or last week. A bunch of scientists got together and are trying to propose a moratorium so that you cannot do this gene editing in human germline cells, okay? But for sure, someone's going to be doing it. Somewhere in some little remote desert island, Dr. Evil or somebody in his group are going to be manipulating little humans that, I don't know, can fly or whatever. But in the next decade, this technology is here. In the next decade, you're going to be seeing this all over the place. All right? Does exercise keep our brains young? Answer is yes. So there have been many studies out, some recent ones, showing that staying physically active, all right, can slow down the rate of cognitive decline. It keeps your brains young. You're less likely to get dementia. You're less likely to get these aging-related brain diseases. And it's not just, most people think, oh, we'll be fine when I hit 60, the doctor's going to tell me this, then I'll start walking and it'll all be good. But this whole aging process starts the day you're conceived, right? So all of you guys right now, the decisions you're making will impact your brain in 40 years from now or 50 or 60 years from now, okay? So it's not just exercising while you're old, which is important, but it's really exercising throughout life. So everybody stand up and walk in place while we're going through lecture today. This is cool, all right? I love biology. It's so beautiful sometimes, as we're showing a baby nursing. So a student in class sent me this, and this is a really fascinating thing I was completely unaware of. And so usually when we think of breastfeeding, we think of it as kind of a one-way street, right? The mother makes milk, gives it to the baby, baby does its thing with it, right? And we talked about colostrum having antibodies and all of these good things. Well, what this, a series of studies out show is that when the baby latches on, there's actually transfer of the baby's saliva back into the milk, back into the mother's breast. Okay? So like a retrograde transport. And what happens is the mother can sense that if the baby's sick. So if the baby has some infection or something, the mother senses that, and she actually increases the number of white blood cells. So white blood cells are your immune cells. So in your blood, we have red blood cells, which carry oxygen, and we have white blood cells, which are all your different classes of immune cells. And these fight bacteria, fight infections, do all sorts of good things. And milk generally has some in them. When you go to buy a gallon of milk at the store, it has it, just as a mother's milk would. It has some of these, but when a baby's sick, within a short period after that, the mother can again sense this. She greatly increases the number of these white blood cells, which then the baby takes in, and it helps fight that infection. Which is pretty damn cool, isn't it? I think that's pretty awesome. So, who knows? I mean, there's probably so much more biology going on in something like this that we have no idea. But it's a really beautiful way of the baby to communicate to the mother that they're sick, other than just screaming at them for 3 days nonstop. So, cool stuff. So, whoever sent that, thank you. This is a really neat story. Okay, so we left off here. We were talking about feeding kids and some of their needs. So now we're going to transition and talk about some of the health effects or negative, I don't know if I'd call them diseases, but health complications, you will, of when you're growing. So when you're an infant through the teenage years. The first one I'm going to talk about is colic. Is anybody, I'm sure many of you are babysitters, and anybody ever babysit for a baby with colic? Yeah, is it fun? Yeah, you should get overtime for that, right? If you're a parent, you should really get paid for it too. So colic is really, in a layman's terms, the kid's just pissed off at the world, okay? We are pretty sure this usually has to do with some digestive process, okay? But basically, the kid has either gas or cramps or some sort of intestinal discomfort, and they're unhappy, uncontrollably unhappy, okay? And so they cry nonstop all through the night, right? Which really sucks when you have to work the next day. This is not uncommon. A third, I've seen sometimes people say up to half of infants get this from your roughly 2 weeks to 3 months of age. And the trick is every kid is different. So there's no like one remedy, one treatment. You have to find what it is, and it's often linked back to the mother's milk. So many remember, when you are breastfeeding or making milk, a lot of the foods you eat, those chemicals in those foods end up in your milk. Okay, so it's not just protein, fats, carbs; it's all these other things too. And so some of those many of those get into the baby, and they can cause gas, they can cause discomfort, whatever it is. And so trying to figure out in our complex diet what that is that we should remove to make our kid happy is not an easy thing, okay? And then sometimes it's just trying to find a position. When my son was little, you couldn't hold him like this. He would still scream at you. So I had this patented, I call it the Heisman hold, where he was basically laying on me like a football, his leg on each side and an arm on each side like this. And that made him happy for whatever reason. I don't know. And some kids, too, it's a gas thing. Sometimes when they're little, you just take their legs, you move them around, they're crying, and then they fart, and they're like, ah. They have this look of complete relief on their face. So Again, we don't know exactly what causes this. We don't know exactly how to treat it, but this is something, and this is also why when you're breastfeeding, you don't want to try like really spicy foods and, you know, some really off-the-wall stuff, because it can lead to this, which is not fun. So another complication is, or another concern is milk allergy. And this is, of course, primarily focused at those that are getting formula. And so if you're not breastfeeding and you put a baby on formula, some babies become allergic to that. There are a few that become allergic to mother's milk, but that's pretty rare. And so there are alternate ones. There's like soy ones. I think there's a few other types of proteins out now because a few kids are allergic to soy as well. Yeah?
If the baby becomes allergic to the mother's breast milk,
Mm-hmm.
is it usually something that the mother is eating that causes that?
That's a good question. So the question is, if the baby becomes allergic to the mother's breast milk, is it due to something the mother is eating? I think under some circumstances that can be the case, but I've also, again, this is not my area of expertise, but I think there are situations, probably very rare, where they're just allergic to mother's breast milk, period. I mean, obviously, from an evolutionary standpoint, this is not going to, you know, if we're 1,000 years ago and you didn't have formula, this was not going to bode well for that child, right? But I do think the food you eat can play a role in that. So I'm not sure which is how much to each. Yeah?
Yeah, actually, we're talking about that. My sister, she, like, when she was first born, she had a lot of like, problems, like, what's it called, cradle calf and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And doctor recommended that my mom stop drinking, like, cow's milk, and so she switched to soy milk and like that. Like she, I think my sister was, like, allergic to the...
So, okay. So the comment was her sister had problems and her mom switched...
Still allergic to milk.
And she's still allergic. Okay, her mom switched from cow's milk to soy milk, and that alleviated the problems in the baby. Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, so that's a thank you for bringing that up. That's actually a perfect example of how this could happen. But there are instances, I think, where it's somewhat independent of diet, but clearly diet probably plays a role. So kids always have GI issues, you know, infections. Remember, their immune system's developing here, so they get a little infection. They can't fight it off like you and I. I mean, we get infected every single day, multiple times, but we almost never notice it because, although it seems like half the people are infected here at the moment, but usually we can fight it off. But kids, their immune systems are developing, so they can't always do that. So they get GI issues, constipation or diarrhea, and the only thing you need to really worry about, or especially worry about, is the diarrhea. Kids become dehydrated pretty fast. Okay, we talked about all that water loss, and so if they are losing a lot of water, you know, you need to see a doctor and keep them hydrated. And usually, what they do outside of breast milk is you can give them some electrolyte fluids. It's a Pedialyte little stuff you maybe see at the store. Another one are ear infections, and I suspect many of you. It seems like kids are either ear infection kids or they're not. Right? Either you're healthy or you get repeated ear infections. There are some things a lot of things we don't know why this happens, but we do know that one thing that can contribute is if you leave milk have a bottle in the bed. So the baby's falling asleep, you have that milk there, and it can actually, if the milk sits there and pools, it can go back up into the tubes, the back of the throat, and actually can lead to an ear infection. And so this is one of the reasons you don't want to leave a bottle in the bed with an infant, because these can be a real pain. And again, more infections means more antibiotics, and we talked about more antibiotics in kids, and that's obviously something you don't want. And along with that, if you leave a bottle in bed, can also lead to dental cavities, all right? So every kid's different when their teeth come in. Some kids have teeth forming at 3 months of age coming out. And if that milk is just pooling in there, milk has sugar, and that bacteria will start, you know, just like you and I, will make plaque, and you can lead to a cavity. So you don't want to do that, and you especially don't want to feed your kids sugary food. So Kool-Aid is not a good substitute for breast milk, all right? So hyperactivity. So what everybody thinks is that you give a kid sugar, they get hyper, right? So you're like, okay, ease up on the sugar on the holidays, the kid will be less calm. That's actually a complete myth, right? Sugar does not cause hyperactivity. All right, some kids are just obnoxious. Right. We don't know. There are clearly, you've been around kids where they go through waves and they become very hyper. We don't know exactly why that is. Clearly genetics and other things probably contribute, but it is not a sugar thing. Okay, now we're getting a little older here. And acne is one of the concerns, especially when we all go through those wonderful hormone changes called puberty. And all of a sudden your face looks like a pizza. Your pizza looks like a face. Okay. And the current myth there is that it's chocolate, right? Chocolate. Oh, I ate a chocolate, I have a pimple now. Or I ate a chocolate and my face broke out. We don't think that's the case. Everybody responds differently to acne. Food could be related to this. Undoubtedly, there's probably triggers. But it's also hormones, it's genetics, and a lot of other things. But the one thing, going back, I mentioned this earlier, is that a lot of lotions, including vitamin A, can be very therapeutic for this. So almost all of the acne lotions have vitamin A, which is a very good thing for your skin. And that can, in some cases, prevent, or in some cases, actually treat acne. Actually, almost all the treatments for acne have vitamin A in it. And the other one that really has only been, well, as you can see on this graph, really been appreciated in the last several years is obesity. Okay, this was never, ever, at least if you look at the period of mankind, or humankind, obesity was never really on the radar until the last few years. And now this is one of the biggest concerns of pediatricians is infants coming in, very young kids coming in that are obese. And when you're obese at this age, the chances of you becoming obese when you're adult goes through the roof. Okay? It's not guaranteed, but almost. And so it's really, really important to try and prevent this from happening. And this just chart shows that the percent of kids that are obese at these different ages over the years. So now we're out, this is a little bit old, but we're out here, and you can see, 10% of kids 6 to 11 years old or 12 to 19 are obese. And down here, I think this statistic is up closer to 10% now too. So 2 to 5-year-olds are being obese. And again, this is really, I think I might have mentioned this in class. There was just a month or two ago, a 2-year-old was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And this is adult onset diabetes. Never has any, this is usually you get when you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s. And obesity, there's no doubt obesity causes type 2 diabetes. And this kid was obese, and they had adult onset type 2 diabetes at age 2. This has never happened before, this young. And so this is really, really scary. And so why is this happening? We could spend an entire semester talking about why we as a population or why kids are becoming obese. There's a lot of triggers. I think one of the culprits a lot of people contribute this to is just the empty calories, the soft drinks that a lot of kids, teenagers and young kids in many cases, get. I remember very clearly taking my, granted I'm biased, I'm in nutrition, but taking my daughter to the daycare for the first time, and kids bring their little snacks in, and this one little kid comes in, maybe 2, and their breakfast was a 20-ounce Coke and a bag of Doritos. Part of me is like, it makes you really sad because that kid's never going to know any better, and their chances of having a healthy life is not good, right? And so don't be one of those parents, okay? Please, if anything, don't do that. And so obviously the home environment is critical, because let me tell you, when you go to school, which you guys were just in a few years ago, you know that the food there isn't exactly wonderful either. So providing a home eating environment, a strong, supportive environment at home with proper nutrition is really, really critical to set the stage and prevent all of this stuff happening, all right? And we know too, it's not just obesity and diabetes, but again, this obesity leads to things later on in life like cancer and cardiovascular disease and all of these things that you don't want. So it's really critical to try and avoid this. So when that day comes and you want to have a child, everybody and their dog has written a book on how to raise that child. So knock yourself out. There's all these books you can read. Having experienced this, I will say one thing. You can read as many books as you want, but this is something where you just have to experience it, right? It's kind of like driving a car. You can read all the books, but until you get behind the wheel, you really don't know what the hell you're doing, okay? And that's pretty much the same way with kids. Okay, so someone asked this question, and we talked a little bit about this, I think, a week or two ago. I said, I've heard that puberty is happening early in kids, especially girls. Why? Is that good or bad? And so this looks at puberty over a pretty wide range of time, over 100 years. And you can see back over 100 plus years ago, the average age for puberty around girls was like 14, 15. And now it's dropped, and the average age is below 10. It's like 8 or 9 on the average, for the average American. Now, there's a big range around this, but this is a huge thing. Why do we care? Yeah.
You said their body is aging faster and that's why sooner.
Yeah, so why is puberty bad is because it's really linked to aging, okay? And the sooner you have puberty, actually, again, it's not, if you have puberty at 8, doesn't mean you're going to die 10 years later, okay? But the earlier you have puberty, the earlier you are likely to die. Okay, so this is a female life expectancy here, and they just looked at all these different countries, all right, and then they looked at age at puberty, okay, and this isn't the actual age, they kind of scaled it, so don't worry about that. But what you see is a negative decline here. So in other words, when you have puberty early, wait, Jim Marner, did I screw this up? I don't know. It must be the scale thing. Maybe they did it wrong. But anyway, the point is generally the age at when you have your period is negatively correlated with lifespan. So down here, these countries are going to have later puberty, and these up here will have early puberty. All right. And if you look at here, the adjusted rates for death. Okay. The earlier you have puberty, your risk for dying for all causes goes up. So the later you have puberty, in other words, the less likely you are to die, at least at a younger age. So this has been studied there's been these epidemiological studies in humans, there's studies in animals that show the same thing. If you can delay puberty, this increases your lifespan. We still don't know all the underlying biology, but for sure there's a link here. Okay? So why are we getting puberty earlier? Why are these girls on average hitting puberty at 8, 9, 10 years of age now compared to 14, 100 years ago? Yeah, a lot of it is obesity driven. And obesity is really too many calories coming in. And so this is just survival, think of it that way, and this is age at puberty. And what you see here is that when you have a BMI of less than 18, or you find the middle ground, which is right here, you see these are much lower, whereas if you have a high BMI right here, you're shifted, meaning you're going to live a shorter life, okay? So in other words, if you look at people, if you look at the girls that are hitting puberty at 8 or 9, they're the ones that are more likely to be overweight or in a very high nutrient environment, or high energy environment, I should say. I shouldn't say nutrient. Okay? Whereas those that are reaching puberty later are generally more, have the normal body weight. And so we know this is partly through hormones. So when you eat a lot of energy, you have things like growth hormones and insulin and all these things which can speed up that process by getting to puberty faster. So that's probably one of the biggest driving things. There's also a lot of talk, and I mentioned this too, about environmental pollutants that have effects that mimic estrogen. Okay? A lot of people have talked about soy. Should I be feeding my kids soy? Because soy, a lot of people have said there's compounds in soy that look like estrogen and your body responds to it. But in actuality, the amount you get from soy is so tiny, it has really no effect on this whatsoever. But there are chemical compounds that you can get in the environment that could also speed this up. And so that's a concern for a lot of people of trying to figure out what those are and to try and basically reverse this trend. But it's kind of scary. Another question today. So you talked about mothers getting engorged or engorgement, and that being an engorgement, if you recall, is really the filling of the breast like too full with milk, okay, to the point where it's extremely painful. And for that being a reason as why they decide to stop breastfeeding. Well, eventually all mothers have to wean their babies. So my question is, do all mothers experience some sort of pain when they're trying to stop their milk production? Are these certain methods stop working better than others? Yes. So this, when you guys get, or guys, girls, get to this point, you're going to talk to your doctor or lactation consultant or somebody, and what they're going to tell you is this is something you don't want to say, oh, I'm done. I'm just going to quit today, okay? You don't do it cold turkey, right? This is a supply and demand thing. So remember, the babies, your reason for producing milk is basically how much they need. So the more they suckle, the more they need, it's going to stimulate those hormones to produce more milk. So as they slow down, so in other words, as you start feeding them food, their need for milk is going to go down, and therefore your production will slow down. So you want to do this gradually. If you just stop, you're still programmed to be producing all that milk, and you're going to be like you're going to have the biggest set you've ever had, okay? But it's not going to be fun because they're going to be really, really painful, right? So this is something you really want to ease up on, right? So you do it very gradually. And so the point is, take it slow. And there is a whole bunch of interesting little anecdotal things on the internet. Cabbage leaves are apparently supposed to be really helpful for engorgement. So, and they're actually, I don't know how scientific it is, but this is a pretty widespread thing. Eating the cabbage doesn't work, but if you put the cabbage leaves on your breast, it actually slows down milk production, or helps with engorgement. So, I don't know, but this is definitely a process you want to kind of ease into. Okay, sticking on the female theme here, there are many types of birth control that affect women's hormones, and some trick the body into believing it's pregnant, which is the way most of them work. Would this affect the types of nutrients you need, especially if the body is treating itself like it's pregnant? Good question. General answer is no, okay? So most of the energy demands, needs when you're pregnant are simply due to the fetus, especially in that last trimester when it's growing so much. It's demand. So it's pulling things from you, and that causes you to change. Just the hormones, and most of these hormones are progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone in birth control. And just that hormone enough, it can have subtle effects on metabolism in your body, but it doesn't necessarily change nutrient needs, okay? There's also this concept that if you go on the birth control pill, you're going to gain weight, right? It's not true. So I always heard this. I've always heard this, because when I went on the pill, I gained 10 pounds. Just kidding. But I actually looked. I spent about a half hour the other day going through the literature, and there's some really big analyses out on this now, and there's no consensus that birth control causes weight gain. Okay? So I don't know why that is, but it doesn't appear to be true. Now, having said that, talking about women's hormones and weight change, weight gain, what period of a woman's life other than puberty do you also see big changes in hormones? Menopause, right? So what happens during menopause? Menopause is when we basically lose our estrogen production, right? You guys, not me, lose your estrogen. And this has very, very severe consequences on metabolism. So what often happens if you look at a woman right before menopause and a woman 5 years after menopause? What happens besides hot flashes and everything else in between? Weight gain, right? So estrogen is actually, it is very good at protecting you from gaining weight. And actually what estrogen is even more so, either than just the weight gain, it's where the weight is located. So we talked about fat or adipose tissue being the sub-Q stuff, in your butt or legs, and then the visceral stuff, which is bad. Estrogen is really good at keeping the fat in the good protective places and away from that visceral fat. And when women go through menopause, you see an accumulation of that visceral fat, which is, we talked about, is bad. It links to all these diseases. And so this is a time period where hormones, drastic changes in hormones, can have a big effect. All right? And there's a lot of people trying. 5-10 years ago, the hormone therapy was a big deal. Guys, some of you, I know you guys aren't in this age, but maybe some of your mothers were, where they try and keep women on hormones, estrogen. But what they found was that when they do that, their risk for breast cancer went up. Okay? Because some of breast cancers are what we call estrogen sensitive. So too high of estrogen for too long can actually trigger breast cancer for some people. But there's still people trying to figure out if somehow we can keep estrogen at a certain level or different types of estrogen in the body to prevent these changes in metabolism that occur when you go through menopause. And the whole hot flash thing is pretty fascinating. I have a sister that's going through that. It's crazy. Like, she'll walk out in the middle of winter in a t-shirt, and I don't understand the biology of that, but it's has to be fascinating. All right. So nutrition during the adult years. So we're going to talk about really aging, all right? And you guys already saw my picture here. This is the fact of stress can do to you. This is Katie Holmes. This is Katie Holmes after she married Tom Cruise. So you can see just what a psychotic spouse can do to one person in a matter of a few years. The point of this chapter is we're going to talk about, once you're an adult, okay, what are the things you need to consider from a nutrition standpoint, from a health standpoint, in order to get to this. And actually, there was a study I just saw came out, I think yesterday, and they were talking about how stress in life does not affect aging. And so I don't know if I believe that. I think most people would argue otherwise, but not sure. So how long will you live? Okay, so our life expectancy has changed a lot over the last few decades. If you were born in 1980 or 1880 or 1800, your life expectancy was almost 30. If you're born in 2000, your life expectancy is almost 80. Okay? Why? Why has this changed so very much? Why? Why are we living longer now? And this trajectory is keeping going upward here. Okay? So your kids, in theory, unless Donald Trump gets elected and the world blows up, will hopefully continue going up. Yes? So one of the big ones is medical treatments. If you think about all the vaccines that have come out in the last 50 years or 100 years, you know, all these diseases like polio and so many that we have vaccinations for now that you guys get as kids. Lots of people used to die from those, and we don't die from those anymore. So vaccinations, medical care, you know, we have hospitals everywhere now. Is a big, big part of this. Okay, huge part. What else? Yeah. Yeah, so staying cleaner so we have safe drinking water, safe food supply, unless you eat at Chipotle apparently. All of these things that, I mean, I've seen some of these studies from a long time ago, but the number of people, I don't remember the numbers, but it was astounding. The number of people back here that died from foodborne illness was just, I mean, crazy. And now we know is quite rare is here. But if you go to other parts of the world where just safe drinking water is an issue, okay? Lots of places you have to drink filtered or bottled water. You can't. And here we're fortunate that's usually never a concern. Okay, so food, safety, cleanliness of water, food supply, also just the environment too, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about quite as many things as from a safety standpoint. So healthcare, what else? Yeah. Yeah, so nutrition. Okay, this is a nutrition class, people. You know, most of these vitamins and minerals we're talking about were only discovered in the last 100 years or 150 years. Okay? So now we know what rickets are, what causes that, and we know what a lot of these other deficiencies are. And so people generally are eating much better. We have a food supply that has changed, so we don't just have to eat what is grown in Minnesota at that time of year or what we can store like we did hundreds of years ago. So we have a lot better food supply, more diversity, and we know a lot more about nutrition, so we can overcome a lot of those deficiencies. So those are the kind of the big driving factors influencing our lifespan. So as we age, well, aging sucks, all right? Let me be blunt. Everything goes to crap. So it's really pretty much whole scale here. As we age, and it starts at, they have this graph set at 30 here, but this varies a lot depending on the person. You think about all of the, we think about aging, look at someone like our grandparents or our parents, and we see the physical changes, the loss of hair, the wrinkles, the whatever it may be. But there is so much going on and from an aging standpoint internally. So just, thinking about some of these here. Bone mass, we know, decreases as you age. Your metabolic rate. So one of the reasons people, you always heard this, every year you age, you gain a pound or something like this as you get older. Part of that is due to your metabolic rate decreasing, okay? And this is largely due to muscle mass decreasing. So this is muscle strength, the red one. I mean, they all pretty much look alike. But as you age, you have less lean muscle mass, and we talked about that driving your metabolic rate, right? So you become more frail, metabolic rate goes down, and that affects your metabolism. But, breathing capacity, the rate your kidneys filter blood, nerve impulses, obviously. This is why old people drive really slow on the road, right? Because they can't respond really well. So all of these things go down, and they keep going. And so the goal is to try and slow these processes down, okay? You're never going to prevent them. At least not in my lifetime. I don't think we're going to be able to see that, or reverse them. That's the big question in the science is, can we stop or reverse aging? Okay, what was that movie with Benjamin Button? Yeah, right? So the guy is old and then he goes backwards and becomes young. If you could do that, that would be a pretty cool thing. Okay, so one of the things that we have to think about as we age is a concept called reserve capacity. Okay, and so normally we go about our day and we do whatever we have to do. And if we're in a stressful situation, let's say we have to sprint or do some physical stress or mental thing, we have the capability of doing that. Okay, we call this reserve capacity. So we can go above and beyond what our basal needs are. What happens is when you're an older person and things start to decline here, they're getting along fine probably with all these things declined at 80, but what happens when something comes along like a big infection, or they fall and break a hip, or there's a big stress in their life? They don't have that either physical or mental capacity to respond to that, okay? So that's what we're talking about, is this reserve capacity. As younger people can have that, and the elderly people struggle with this. And this is why usually a turning point in someone's life is a big event like that. I mean, hip fractures is one of the biggest debilitating things for an older person. If you look at mortality after a hip injury, as soon as you get a hip injury, mortality rates spike up, okay? Partly due to something like this. You have a question? Okay. And so what we want to do is what we call successful aging, okay? And this is really the processes due simply to the natural aging and not to speed things up, okay? So don't smoke, for example, all right? We know smoking speeds up this process. Pollution speeds up this process. Bad diet speeds up this process. Okay, so we want to do what we can to slow this down. And the one concept that I really want you guys to remember is something called compression or morbidity. Okay, so if I could, let's say I'm Harry Potter here and I have my magic wand, and I could wave it all over you and say, how many of you would want to live to be 120 years old if I could make that happen? Show of hands. How many of you want to live to be 120? A few people. How many of you would, same question, how many want to live to be 120, but I can guarantee you that you will be healthy all 120 years and you'll just die at 120. Different, right? So we all have seen what aging looks like. We've seen our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents go through cancer or debilitating injuries or whatever it is. Nobody wants to do that. We all want to live a healthy life until that day comes and boom, all right? And that's what we call compression and morbidity. So we want to minimize those unhealthy years, or hopefully days, or hours, or minutes, or seconds. All right? So we want to have long life, but healthy life in the absence of disease. All right? And this is really, really the key. It's not so much how long you live, it's how long you live healthy. So this is just kind of a cheesy little example of this. So if this is a normal age in years, and this is your, you have death up here, more severe symptoms, all of these things. If you speed it up through things like smoking, other things like that, you're going to reach this threshold soon, and then you're going to be in the disease state. So not only may you die younger, but you're going to live more years where you have a disease. Where if you live a healthy life, eat right, maybe a few good genes won't hurt either, this will slow this down. And we know genetics play a huge role in this, okay? We know of certain genes in the human body that if you mutate them, or if you have a mutation, you are very likely to live to be 100 years of age, okay? And there are people that they've went in and looked at centenarians, and a lot of these people have these mutations. So genetics plays a huge role in this and preventing disease. What affects the rate of aging? Okay, this was supposed to be animated, but it's not. So, as I mentioned, heredity. It's a big, big one. Probably the single biggest thing is your genes. So, again, at this point, we can't control that, but maybe in the future years we will. I don't know. Women, you guys live longer, all right? You may have to go through menopause, which kind of sucks. You have to give childbirth, all these things, but you get a bonus in the end. You get to live longer, all right? Why is this? Could be a chromosome genetic thing. Could be a hormone thing. Maybe guys are just so much more stressless to live with. I don't know. But this is a fact. Women generally live longer. Probably also because guys do more stupid stuff, like guys are more likely to smoke and drink excessively and parachute without parachutes, things like that. Lifestyle. This is where we can actually start to influence something, okay? So diet. I talked about exercise. Huge effect, okay? Exercise can delay this whole aging process, make you live longer. Diet. Avoid abuses. So all of these things can influence it. And there's also some really very early interesting studies talking about going back to our old friends, the gut bacteria, and influencing lifespan. They influence everything, right? They make the world go round. But having certain bacterial species in your gut may actually contribute to how long you live. Just kind of freaky. And the other one is your environment. If you just track people and you look at their income level, you look at their education level, that is a good predictor of how long you're going to live. Now, some of these, like for example, income and education level also influence healthcare, right? If you have money and you're educated, you're more likely to get good healthcare, which will contribute to how long you live. Another thing is environmental. Have you guys seen in the news the last few days, I forget the name of the town. There's a town in China where they had like the red smog alert. It was like really, really bad. Like the levels were, I don't know, as high as they've ever been. And so they were closing schools and all this stuff. Living in that environment where there's a lot of air pollution or water pollution or toxins in the environment can also speed up this whole process. So, hang on, we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so I want to talk about the aging process and diet. And so these are pictures from my family reunion this last summer. This is Cousin Eddie, okay? And this is Cousin Bob. So Cousin Eddie and Bob are the same age, okay? These two are identical. The only difference is that Cousin Eddie here, or Cousin Bob, was fed about 30% less calories than this guy, right? So these are obviously not my relatives. These are monkeys that are in a controlled study at the National Institutes, this was in University of Wisconsin actually. And these monkeys from very early on were fed different diets. Same diet, but this guy was caloric restricted. So they figure out how much a monkey normally eats, and then they remove about 30% of the food from that monkey. Okay? So we're not starving him, but we're limiting how much energy he's getting to some degree. And what do you notice? Well, I mean, just physically, I mean, this dude looks like he's been through the ringer, and this guy's got nice hair, he's got a nice perky tail, he's looking pretty good for, I guess, a monkey. And the big thing is, if you follow these guys out, these are the control groups, and this is survival. So at about 30 years of age, and remember, monkeys are our closest known genetic relatives, right? So these guys are like 99% the same as us on the genetic level. So they're not a fly, they're not a worm, or anything where a lot of these studies are done. They're pretty close to us. And so these are the guys that are fed the ad libitum diet. Half of them die by the age of 30. But those fed the caloric restricted diet, only about a fourth of those are gone by the age of 30. So it's increasing the lifespan of these monkeys. And this has been shown in just about every known living organism, from yeast to bacteria to flies to worms to mice to rats to cows to every species, is that when you cut back on calories a little bit, it alters your lifespan. It increases your lifespan. So where do we, as Americans, fall into this picture? We're like the control plus, right? We are in a food abundant society where most people not only are eating as much as they want, but usually more, okay? And so we're never even close to this caloric restriction group. We're probably down here somewhere, all right? And this is a big, big concern. And there's a lot of interest in trying to understand why this is happening and how it can lead to this. Yeah?
What would our calorie per day be if we were caloric restricted?
So what would our calorie per day be if we were caloric restriction? Well, it's really based on what your needs are. So everybody in here has probably a little bit different basal needs for calories. You know, you look on the back of your cereal box, it gives you for 2,000 or 2,500, right? So 30% of that. So if you're eating 2,000 calories today, you restrict it to 1,400 calories. That would be comparable to what they're doing here. Now, this isn't a threshold thing. We know in studies that it's a gradient. So the more you, or at least to some degree, the more you limit calories, the more response you get. So if you restrict 10%, you still get a response, but it's not quite as much. And as you go down, it's more and more. What we are just trying to figure out is what the composition of the diet, or how the composition of the diet influences this. So in other words, what we need to take out of the diet. And some early studies are suggesting that it may not just be calories, but it actually might be specific nutrients in the diet, specific energy-yielding nutrients that may convey the same effect as limiting calories. Okay? So we're still trying to figure that out. But when this data has been kind of growing for the last years or even a few decades, and so people read the news and want to live a long life. So this is the Calorie Restriction Society. Okay, this is a group of people around the world. There's various ones in various cities, and they have vowed to follow a calorie-restricted diet. And there's actually studies going on at the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. here, where they are actually putting people on calorie-restricted diets. And those are ongoing right now. We don't know what all the results of those are going to be, but to see if this can for sure happen in humans. All of the evidence suggests it can. Okay, so by limiting calories, we can promote a lifespan and reduce those diseases later in life. What do you think the drawbacks of this would be? Any drawbacks? If you had to take your diet and cut out 30% of the calories, what would be the drawbacks of that? Yeah.
Muscle growth?
So muscle growth. Okay, so there's a lot of things you need to factor into this. First of all, when you start this, and this is a big question. If you have a 2-year-old, do you want to limit their calories 30%? Probably not a good idea. Most of these studies they do post-puberty, But you're right. If you're limiting your calories 30%, your chances of being a bodybuilder, maybe a professional athlete, probably not so good, right? So there's going to be some things like that. What about just from a personal well-being standpoint? Yeah. Could what? It could affect your mental health. Two sides to this. We know when, and I don't have this data up here, but for example, go to the monkeys. Actually, caloric restriction improves their brain function later in life. But I think what you're getting at is you're going to be hungry and grumpy all the time, right? And so I actually know one of the guys that did some of these original studies, and he went on a caloric restricted diet. And after 6 months, he quit. He said he was so pissed off at life that, I mean, food is reward, right? We talked about this. And so that's why there's so much interest right now in trying to understand, okay, if this appears so beneficial for decreasing disease, increasing how long we live, can we remove specific nutrients or alter the composition of the diet rather than limiting so many calories? But the point of this I want to make is that where we're at as a society, and you think about the obesity epidemic and all the things that go with it, we're basically doing the complete opposite of this, right? And this is a huge, huge concern. It's not just becoming obese. Now cancer rates and some of these things are going up that are tied to obesity, and this is probably the driving factor of this. Our bodies are always in a system of so much energy. We're always growing. We never hit the brakes, so to speak. The gas is always on when it comes to energy. And that's why things like exercise or fasting, calorie restriction are so beneficial. Okay? And this is something to think about as we move forward. And tying into that, if anybody, I usually don't promote books or anything like that in this class, but ever heard of Blue Zones? Nobody? Yeah? A couple people. So this is a really interesting book, and the concept is interesting. So this was sponsored actually by National Geographic. And they asked the question, okay, what do people that live a long life have in common? And so they scoured the globe, basically, and their first requirement was to find societies that had good health records. Because if you don't know how long people are living, then there's no point. Okay? And then they went into once they found that, they found populations of people that lived exceptionally long. Okay? They called these blue zones. All right? And originally they found 5 different zones here. The longest lived is in Okinawa, Japan. These are the longest lived people in the world. If you Google that on YouTube or somewhere, you'll see videos and they're on the news and all this stuff. These people live, I think, well into their 80s, the average lifespan. And so they went into these different groups and they just studied them and said, what do these people all do in common? And then they came up with this kind of pyramid. And I think this is interesting because from a biological standpoint, a lot of this makes sense. Okay? The one thing that almost all of them had in common was they all lived an active lifestyle. All right? They moved. It's part of life. Not necessarily means they're an athlete. They're not necessarily runners or bikers or weightlifters or anything like that. They just move. Okay? That's part of their daily routine. They're constantly moving. And we know, again, from all the research that's been done, how critical this is. Another common theme is that they had what I would call a purpose-driven life. This is more maybe of a mental thing, whereas when they got out of bed, they were happy. Okay? They knew that they had a purpose in life. Right? If you get up and you're depressed and you have to come to this class every day, it's only a semester, so it shouldn't kill you, then that might have a negative impact. All right? So having a rewarding career, a rewarding marriage, a rewarding life. The other thing is what they call downshift, which is really stress reduction. A lot of these people either meditated, did yoga, some sort of stress relief. Okay? Some stepping away, disconnecting from the daily grinds, which I think most people would agree with is a very, very important thing to do. From a nutrition standpoint, they found 3 common themes. The first is the one I just talked about. The people in Okinawa have a saying, which it's Japanese, so I can't pronounce it, but they have a saying that you stop eating before you feel full. An 80% or 70% rule. So in other words, when you're done with the meal, maybe content or even a little bit hungry, but you're not full. You don't gorge yourself ever. Okay? That's exactly what I'm talking about with this whole calorie restriction. Okay, these people don't eat a lot of calories, and that's probably a big contributor to why they're living such a long life. The other one is eat lots of carrots. No, this is actually eat lots of plants, but carrots probably turn your skin orange, but eat lots of plants. So plant-based diets was a common theme for all of these. Now, some of these were vegetarian types, some were not, but they just didn't eat a lot of meat. Okay? Very vegetarian fruits and vegetables based diets. My favorite was this one, wine at 5. I think this is PM, but they didn't specify. So moderate, and I've talked about this in class, moderate alcohol consumption. Not excessive, a glass or two of wine or beer a day. All right? And I would argue that this and this are also tied together. If you look at many of these cultures, the end of the day, what they do is they get together with friends, with family, with neighbors, have a drink, you laugh, you joke, you de-stress, you put all that crap from the day's work behind you, right? It's a good way of unwinding, disconnecting. And I think that probably contributes to this. And then the last one was a feeling, really a social connection, okay? They had a very strong family. They, in some cases, religion or a social network within their community that was a very important part of their life. They weren't alone, okay? And we know from a lot of studies having this purpose-driven life and having a social network is very, very important for mental health, for physical health, for longevity, etc. Yes?
Yeah, I just had a comment about so I was reading this article by the NIH, and they talk about, I'm not sure if this is on Okinawa, but a population in Japan, they were kind of studying like natural instances of calorie restriction, so they actually talk about people in the biosphere too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people there have been some studies on like the calorie restriction interaction with people, but they talked about this population in Japan and how they have like the highest number of like centenarians.
Right.
Like it's like 5
Yep.
or 100,000. And they actually eat a diet that's about 30% less than the Japanese people on the mainland. So I think it was like 16
Yeah, so exactly. So several points that you just made here is these people, not all of Japan eats like this. These guys have a specific cultural thing where they eat the less calories, which is really kind of interesting. And the other thing you mentioned is the biosphere. Anybody ever heard of biosphere? This was back when, the 80s? Did we talk about biosphere? So this was this little experiment, I think it was in Arizona. I haven't even read much about it, where they basically put a dome, like a glass dome up that was, I don't know how big it was, stuck a bunch of people in there and say, hey, live for 2 years. And they had to grow their own food and come up with everything they needed. And they had, as you would imagine, some problems growing food. So these people, and they couldn't let them in or out. This was, I don't know who the hell volunteered to do this, but anyway, they must have paid really, really well. These people didn't have a lot of food, so they were calorie restricted for several years. And that, they noticed some differences in these people related to this whole aging process. And that also fueled kind of the current interest in this whole concept of how calorie restriction can actually lead to potentially a longer and healthier life. So to follow up on this, so this guy actually came, the guy that wrote this book, gave a talk here, and the video is like 20 minutes, and I'm not going to show it, but if you're interested, you can go look. But he gave a talk here in the Twin Cities, and as a follow-up, they got some funding, and what they did is they went into small communities, just a few, and they wanted to see if they could implement this into the communities. And one of them, I think it was the only one in the U.S., was Albert Lea, Minnesota. Okay? And so they went in, anybody from Albert Lea? Sort of. So they went in and they made a whole bunch of subtle changes, all right? So they got people, they basically put a lot of people in groups that were like walking groups. So you had a communal, the support group, but also a support group to help people move, right? They put sidewalks in for everyone to walk. They from an eating standpoint, they made lots of little changes. For example, they went into some of the grocery stores, and I love the way the grocery stores are laid out, right? You're checking out, they got all the candy and junk food there, so you spend the longest time there, and it's, where the positioning and marketing is really key, and they went in and made some changes. They made the layout of the grocery stores, they changed so that it was more conducive for people to buy produce. They went into the restaurants and decrease the portion sizes of all the local restaurants, and then instead of having the salad as like the side option that you have to replace the fries with, they did it the other way. So they had the salad or the vegetables as the main entree, and then you had to order off of it. These little things, they went in and changed. I told you about the bowl experiment with the soup, right? They did little things like that. You've changed plate sizes. It messes with your brain and thinking how much you eat. All of these little things that went in, and I haven't seen the full report on this yet, but just the few things I've heard is that in many ways it is beneficial. Now, we'll never know, or I don't think we'll ever know if these people live longer, but clearly their health was better as a result of this. So I think it's an interesting concept. I think a lot of these have a lot of truth to them, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes and from our standpoint, what we can do from a diet or any of these other things to increase this. So, any other questions or comments on this? All right. So, the last thing I'm going to talk about today is simply why do we age? Okay. What biologically causes us to age? Okay. It's just there are reasons for it, and there are a lot of things that contribute to this. The biggest one is that over time we just wear out, sort of. Okay? If you think of a car and you drive it every day for 10 years, things are going to start to break down, right? Over time. And that's kind of what happens to us. Every minute, every second, we're exposed to stresses. Reactive oxygen species, pollutants in the environment, too many calories, whatever it is. And this will build up little bits of damage all the time, and that builds up, okay? So, you breathe in some pollutant and it maybe damages one little piece of DNA. But you do that for 60 years, and then all of a sudden you got a lot of DNA that's damaged, all right? Or free radicals, or all of these things. Copy errors means, many cells in our body are replicating all the time. In order to do that, you have to copy the DNA, just like a copy machine, to a new one. Well, the enzymes that do that aren't 100% perfect, and sometimes, although they're really good, when you have to copy 4 billion things, you make a mistake. One mistake, probably not going to hurt, but enough mistakes, and all of a sudden you have cancer. Okay? So this is a big one, the cumulative damage. Another one that's thought to occur is the hormonal changes. Okay, and I won't get into the details, but things like menopause and some of these things can influence it. Also just other hormones too, like, for example, insulin. We talked about overeating, things like that. That's constantly driving things like insulin and growth hormone, which we know too much for too long can be a bad thing. Another thing that contributes to this is our immune system. So our immune system not only defends us against bacteria and pathogens and all sorts of bad things, but it also keeps our own cells in check. So if, for example, I would bet almost all of us had had cancer at some point in our lives. But usually our immune system monitors that and wipes out a cancer cell as soon as it sees it. But as we age, your immune cells start to lose their ability to do that. And so as a result, that can influence the aging process. Okay? And autoimmune diseases like arthritis, for example, is an autoimmune disease. You see this in older people, very rarely in young. That is really kind of a weakening of your immune system. Another thing, we have a lot of proteins in our body, and as you all know, you don't see too many 80-year-olds doing splits, doing really intense yoga. We become stiffer, and that is because some of these proteins or connective tissue in our body starts not becoming so flexible. It becomes cross-linked, what we call, all right? And so it limits our flexibility, and when you do that, you're more likely to increase risk, and you also get other damages. And there's another area that's growing too much, or growing in this area about kind of like when women are born, they have a certain number of eggs, right, that they can ovulate and have babies. And then when those run out, you're done. The theory is a lot of people think holds true to cells, too. Certain cells are there. They can divide a certain number of times, and then that's it. Okay? And if anybody heard of telomeres? Yeah, some of you guys have heard of this. So these are parts of chromosomes that the shortening of them is thought to contribute to the aging. This kind of ties in with that a little bit too. Every time a cell divides, those shorten a little bit. Okay? And so there might be, for some people, kind of a programmed time at which you're going to die. Okay? Obviously, a lot of things are going to change that factor in throughout your life. But when you're born, there may be some sort of set point. Okay? And so that's another current thought process. And the other one, which I've just talked about, is too many damn calories. Stop eating so much, people. Okay? We know excess calorie intake speeds up the aging process on a cellular level. Okay? It leads to free radicals and all sorts of bad things that we won't get into. And so that's another one. But it's a combination, really. It's not one thing that contributes. It's a combination of many things. So we're going to stop there today. And we'll pick up Tuesday. We'll finish this chapter, go through some questions today, go over the exam. Yeah. Oh, yes. The coercive vowels are up. So please fill those out. Unless you think I suck, and then don't fill them out. Okay? But yeah, please do that. I think it closes... I don't remember when it closes, but it's not open till like finals. I think it closes sometime soon, so please do so.